dark shadows moving in the woods, and I have no doubt that whatever I have resurrected through this book is sure to come calling for me.
The Evil Dead. The Evil Dead is punk philosophy and aesthetics in horror movie form. There's no better way to describe it. The plot is minimal, the characterization non-existent, and that's because neither of these things matter. The film is about assaulting the audience's sensibilities, making them laugh at things they know they shouldn't be laughing at, making them feel the pain and the mutilation. It's about making them sick to their stomach and wanting more. What's it about? It's about a group of students who go off for a quiet holiday to a cabin in the woods, find some strange recordings and books and occult material in the cellar, play a tape that they really shouldn't play that has a rather unpleasant incantation on it, which summons something rather nasty from within the woods, which systematically sets about possessing them all, transforming them into these pseudo-demonic walking corpse creatures that require bodily dismemberment in order to incapacitate. And when I say dismemberment, I mean every inch of them has to be separated from the other. Fingers have to be separated from hands, hands from wrists, etc., etc., in suitably graphic fashion. Now, one of the things that makes this film so intense and fascinating is that, like many horror films from the early 1980s, it has this wonderful slow build where it takes quite a while for anything to happen. Everything is just tension and tension and tension. And it's masterfully directed by Sam Raimi, who was fucking 19 at the time. Can you believe that? Doesn't that just make you want to hurl? The fact that this guy was 19, and the people who made it, all of them were just essentially film students. And they hadn't even any budget to work with. They hadn't gone to any studio to get funding or anything like that. They just went around to dentists and doctors and to independent people and said, put in $200 or whatever you're prepared to give, and you'll get a return when the film is done. And that's how they did it. And ironically produced a horror film that is more effective, more coherent, more directorially and narratively accomplished than, I'd say, at least 90% of the enormously budgeted films that come out of Hollywood today. Why does it succeed? I mean, technically it shouldn't. It shouldn't, because The Evil Dead is such a schlocky film, as you'd imagine from a group of student directors. It's technically a B-movie, but it is the highest class horror B-movie that you will ever come across. And it maintains a morbid fascination because of its intensity and because of its willingness to torture its audience. And it doesn't do so in the fetishized way that movies such as Saw do. I mean, much as I enjoy Saw, there is something about the genre that it didn't necessarily propagate, but that it made more popular, and that is the gornography genre. It's something of a one-trick pony. It's all about the explicitness of the pain, or the graphicness of the mutilation. The Evil Dead has something underneath that. It has this undercurrent of wry humour. In many ways, Sam Raimi himself has always said that a significant part of his inspiration for The Evil Dead was the Three Stooges. It's the Three Stooges with axes, chainsaws and blood. And you can certainly see that coming through. It's a funny, funny film, but it is also genuinely frightening. There is a sense of creeping dread throughout the first few acts that then turns into this explosion of occult and violent insanity in which the screen literally runs red with blood, in which the floor is covered in the twitching meat of the half-dead. It's glorious to behold, but it is exhausting. It's an exhausting film to watch. Because it is a film that picks you up and joyfully chews you and spits you out again. It's so much fun. It's a popcorn horror movie, definitely. And one which will make you jump and shriek and scream. But which, unlike many films that maintain the same elements today, has a profound sense of atmosphere. And that is something that sets it apart, this X factor. And I'm not quite sure where that comes from. And one thing that must be taken into consideration when you're watching this film are the budgetary constraints under which it was working. I've never been so impressed by something of such small budget since, really, I think the only thing I can think of in recent decades that equals it in terms of its accomplishment is probably the Blair Witch Project, which is right up there amongst my favourite horror films. And I'll definitely be reviewing that at some point, but that is going to be special. Because the Blair Witch Project is one of those films that consistently scares me, and it takes a lot. I've been raised on horror films. I've been watching them since I was very young indeed. And the Blair Witch Project manages it every single time, and there aren't many that do. Interestingly, one of the factors that seems to be one of The Evil Dead's principal strengths is its lack of budget. Because it seems this has forced a certain inventiveness and ingenuity when it comes to creating particular shots and scenes, which ironically have coined techniques that have become staples of the horror genre. You'll notice at the very beginning we're given a POV shot. We're not quite sure whose eyes we're looking through. It's the Force. It's the evil entity that inhabits the woods around the cabin, and it seems to be travelling along the surface of a lake or a pond. The way that was achieved apparently was just by sticking the camera on a little toy boat and pushing it along with a stick. But it looks glorious. Another thing they did was bolting the camera to a large piece of wood so that it moved about like that, and then they ran forward with it. And it creates this impression of something sifting through the air of the woods, whose eyes, for want of a better, you are looking through. It's wonderful. In fact, those are the scariest moments of The Evil Dead, when you're looking through the eyes of the Force, and you know that it's heading for that cabin and the innocent teens within. I mean, there is some attempt to put together some semblance of a coherent plot. I mean, there are sort of love triangles that go on. But one of the glorious things about the movie is that it takes exquisite joy in pulling them apart in the most painful and visceral ways imaginable. There is a wonderful point in which Ash, whom I'm sure some of you must know of, Ash from the Evil Dead movies, he's something of an iconic character. You can get action figures of him. There's a point where, ably played by the Chin, as he's become known, Bruce Campbell, wonderful B-movie actor, who he's forced to effectively dismember his possessed girlfriend via a series of means. There are axes involved, there are chainsaws at certain points, there's a spade with which he decapitates her. And it's just delicious. Every inch of it is deliciously perverse and disgusting. And then of course we have one of the most infamous scenes from the entire movie, which is probably a significant part of the reason why it was banned during that whole ridiculous furor of the video nasty in the 1980s. Oh, goodness, stupidity. Anyway, which is the forest rape scene. One of the female characters wanders out into the woods, as they're wont to do in horror films. Let's face it, it's something that women do in horror films. Let's wander out defenceless into the dark. Excellent idea. And so off she goes, and the woods come alive, and there is well, what can only be described as a rape scene, which is probably one of the most distressing parts of the film. But the fact that any movie can feature something as horrific as a woman being raped by trees, and yet just a couple of scenes later make you laugh, and then make you groan, and then make you want to vomit, and then make you turn away or make you scream. It's fantastic. It's a wonderful piece of work. And unless you are a particularly squeamish individual, in which case I would certainly steer clear of it, it's a classic. I guarantee that you'll have enormous fun watching it. So yes, The Evil Dead. Not big, not clever, but glorious.